Welcome, World History students, to the War and Revolution unit, which is effectively a World War I unit with a little bit more on the revolution in the Soviet Union and kind of what happened in Europe post-war than what you would have gotten last year in the US2 class. So again, this is basically World War I with some additional important details. That being said, the first section is about the causes of World War I, so it's useful to kind of look at where the European empires stood, because they're the ones that caused the war, at the beginning of 1914. So you can see basically every colored empire here is eventually a belligerent, meaning a fighter in World War I. So the only exception really being are the Dutch here with their dark green empire, and they end up kind of sitting out neutrally in the war. More or less. So, that being said, you can see the British in this kind of green color control the largest empire, the French the second largest. The remaining empires are much further behind, and the Germans are in this orange, and they're probably, I guess, the third largest, but that may be an overestimation. Your alliance systems. You've got two main alliances. They get different names at different points in the war. You've got the Triple Entente, which means in French, the Triple Alliance of Russia, France, and Great Britain. You've got the Triple Alliance, which means in English, the Triple Alliance, which is initially Italy, Austria-Hungary, and Germany. Italy quickly shifts sides because they hate the Austrians in 1915 and joins the alliance of Russia, France, Britain. At that point, it also includes Japan. The Ottomans join in 1914 for frankly, really weird historical reasons. It involved Germans taking I'll explain when we get to the slides. And you also have the two Balkan nations of Bulgaria on the Central Powers / Triple Alliance side, and Serbia on the Triple Entente / the Allied Powers side. This is a map showing the Allied Powers in black once the U.S. joins in. Here, let me get my little pointer up. Once the U.S. joins in 1917, you can see Japan is here in 1914 on the Allied side, and all the rest of the world that's in this dark black are colonies controlled by these Entente power empires. Central Powers are much smaller geographically, but nonetheless they have pretty large population considering. Basically, because of American imperialism, the South American countries are more or less neutral in the war, but some of them are kind of tip of thumb on the scales on the Allied power side. This is a map of the whole, basically most of the fighting in World War I. There are effectively, let's see, they've got the Eastern Front, you've got the Caucasus Front here, these are the Caucasus Mountains. You keep going, you've got basically the Balkans. There's a war in the Balkans going on at the same time as the rest of World War I. And you've got this fighting in the Alps in between Italy and Austria-Hungary, which is, imagine hiking and also trying to fight a war at the same time. And then the most famous part is the Western Front, which is the trench warfare, what most people think about with World War I, although that was not the only warfare that was occurring. The focus question for this section is, what were the causes of World War I, and what series of events started it? I'm asking you, what are the isms, basically? What are the ideas and the events in history that happened beforehand? And what specific series of events? So this is the assassination of the Archduke, etc. So again, the ideas, specific events. So the question here on the first slide. So nationalism is probably the most obvious and important reason the First World War occurred. So nationalism is, once again, it's the idea that a group of people who share a common culture and identity and acknowledge that culture should belong in a state together. A state is a country. It's basically the basic word for country. A nation is a group of people that, again, share that common culture, often common language, often common religion. It's a really romantic idea that doesn't exist in quite the same way until the French Revolution, as we looked at earlier this year. The very idea of a nation state, the idea that a country should have control over its own borders, is only from the 1640s and that Peace of Westphalia that ends the wars of religion in Europe. So all that background aside, initially, nationalism is the domain of liberals. So that means people that believe in human rights, You have a liberal constitution like the American Constitution with a First Amendment that protects freedom of speech, for example. That's liberalism. Same thing, is having a government that doesn't force people to do things they don't want to do. So you don't have, you have the least amount of control with the most amount of liberty. That's liberty, liberalism. So it's freedom is basically the argument. So liberals who want freedom against the monarchies of Europe organized a bunch of revolutions in the middle of the 19th century in 1848 in an attempt to organize Europe into peaceful nation states. So again, they thought if every group of people, everyone who believed themselves to be part of a nation, had their own country, then Europe would be peaceful and beautiful and everything would be great. Except the monarchs of Europe had a different set of ideas, and they came and smashed those revolutions to prevent a liberal Europe from developing. And you get a reactionary, meaning against change, and conservative, meaning keep things the same they are, group of monarchs who set up what's called the concert of Europe and a balance of powers that's based on competition rather than cooperation within Europe. So if you think about it, you have a balance of powers. That means you've got two armed camps or several armed camps ready to fight each other. And the idea is, oh, well, we can't fight because war would be so devastating to each of us. We're evenly matched, can't fight. So instead of spending energy and money fighting in Europe, the imperial powers fought around the rest of the world. And that helps tie into imperialism, which we'll get to in a second. And so basically, as long as there's colonies to colonize, no need to go fight a land war in Europe. But nationalism still doesn't disappear, even though the liberal version of it does, because again, that's defeated by the monarchs of Europe. And Germany in 1871 is unified in a series of basically military conquest by the conservative government of Otto von Bismarck, and Italy is unified under the monarchy of Sardinia-Piedmont in 1860. So, boom, all of a sudden the balance of powers is gone. So these new powers, so Germany and Italy, these are the disruptors, enter into a series of alliances. I'll start actually with the second one here, the Triple Entente. This is a Russian propaganda poster. So this says, I believe, unity, I think is what it says up here. And so this is the national personifications of three countries. You've got Russia. Look at how stern she is. See that kind of visage? She's holding the Orthodox Christian cross. She's got a shield. She's militarily dressed, kind of very classical Roman style kind of dress. You've got France looking on, kind of an adoration. You've got warfare in the background. You have a reluctant Great Britain here, uncertain if she wants to join the war. So I think the national personification of France is named Marianne. I can't remember the name of Russia nor Great Britain. Got a Zeppelin in the background, explosions. So in any case, that's the Triple Entente. It's a reaction to the alliance of Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, which was created in 1882. So it may be no surprise if you remember, Russia is not a liberal nation. They've got a czar they're peasants who are barely out of serfdom. So an alliance between, democracy here, and autocracy here, it seems unlikely, except for that competition about nationalism. Each nation wants to have their own thing set up. The Entente is largely, no surprise, coordinated by France against Germany because of a desire to reacquire the territory of Alsace-Lorraine, which had been lost by France to Germany in 1871 as part of the Franco-Prussian War that created the German state. Last bit of nationalism that helps lead to World War I is the Ottoman Empire has a multinational nature. They have Greeks, they have Romanians, they have Croatians, they have Bulgarians, they have Turks, many of whom have different languages, most of whom have different religions. And Russia has an agenda starting in the 1870s to beat up on the Ottoman Empire and free all the Orthodox Christians from this Muslim empire's territory, basically. Austria-Hungary says, great, sounds good, let's divide it up. And so Austria makes a deal with Russia to get Bosnia, which I'll show you in a map in a second, and Russia would get Bessarabia, which is this territory that's modern Moldova on a map, if you've ever looked at a map of Europe, in 1908. So, deal between these two autocracies. You may also notice that 1907 is the year that the Triple Entente is created. So even though there's this alliance between Russia, France, and Great Britain, Russia's still making deals with um, the Austro-Hungarians. The Russians also helped Bulgaria declare independence from the Ottomans the very same year, which I misspelled, but I gotta fix. This is the Balkans. We've talked about the Balkans before. You probably didn't know what the Balkans looked like. These are the countries in the Balkans. Here is Bosnia. Moldova was annexed by Russia right there. So Austria, at the start of World War I, controls what's modern-day Slovenia, Croatia, this is Hungary, much of Romania, much of Serbia, and they annex this territory called Bosnia. So, I guess I could double copy the slides. But in any case, it doesn't really matter. When you look at these slides, they'll look different than what they do in this slideshow. So in any case, 1897, there's a new czar of Russia who comes into power, and he effectively reneges on the deal where the Russians and the Austrians are going to divide the Balkans up between the two of them. Instead, he says, no, 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 I want it all. I want all these Orthodox countries to run their own show. So there's a coup in Serbia. They replace the monarchy of Serbia with a pro-Russian group, and now all of a sudden you've got Serbia ready to fight Austria at all times over the territory of Bosnia, basically because the Russians are pushing this. This is going on in all of Europe. So a good example is the Irish are trying to make their own independent state in Ireland, trying to get free of Great Britain, and they get help from the Germans. Okay, so the second question is, how does the suppression of dissent at home help contribute to the outbreak of World War I? This is a parade of German social democrats after the loss of Germany in World War I. So, spoiler alert, Germany erupts into revolution at the end of World War I, and the socialists take over and institute a democracy. The monarchy of Germany was so worried about this that there are many historians who believe, especially this is a very Marxist argument, that the suppression of dissent against the monarchies of Europe helped push them into war. And there's some evidence of this based on the reaction that these social democrats in Germany in particular had. The Social Democrats get 34% of the Reichstag. They're the biggest party. They're anti-war, supposedly. As soon as war breaks out, they all vote for it, except for a couple. This is a similar pattern in almost every nation in Europe. All these countries are whipped up into a patriotic frenzy, and the conservative reactionary monarchs basically get what they want, at least until the war starts being understood at home, and dissent is suppressed. So, militarism. This is the idea that the military is basically an acceptable solution to many problems a country might have. The military spending of countries between 1890 and 1914 and the size of the militaries nearly doubled as the world kind of became more colonized and these powers started to kind of cement their alliances. So there's a lot of deference given to military planners as well, most of whom believe that so basically the philosophy, if you remember, speak softly and carry a big stick, the idea is that, here in Europe, is if you're holding a stick and you don't use it and you put your stick down, you're going to get hit over the head. So any sign of, quote, weakness, meaning that you back down on military escalation, is a sign that you are socio-darwinistically going to be destroyed by other countries. What this means is that any war wouldn't have anyone back down. There's going to be no peacemakers, and it's going to result in everybody going to war with each other because there are two armed camps. So this chart here shows you, here 1890, the spike in military spending. Great Britain sees Germany go from having, relatively lower military spending. A couple years, Germany spends more money than Great Britain, and they go crazy. So in any case, militarism helps to achieve the start of World War I by giving each country a hammer that starts to make every problem look like a nail. Oh, I forgot to mention, they lengthen the period of conscription. So instead of serving for maybe a year when you turn 18 in the military, it might be 3, or in the case of Russia, 4 years, which helps definitely increase the size of the militaries. Back to the Balkans. So how did an event in the Balkans help contribute to the outbreak of World War I? Serbia, at this point, under this new pro-Russian monarch, sees themselves as Russia's little brother because they have a Slavic language they share, they have a Christian faith they share, the Orthodox, and a goal of creating a greater Serbia. The greater Serbia would then eventually transition into a land of the South Slavs, Yugoslavia, and Russia's here to back them. So there's two wars that happened: the 1908 Balkan War, and which is when Austria gets Bosnia and Russia gets Bessarabia. And the Second Balkan War is between just these kind of tiny little nations in the Balkans. So you've got Serbia gets this green territory. They expand. They steal it from Bulgaria. Bulgaria and the Ottomans. Bulgaria steals this red territory from the Ottomans. The Greeks get these islands, and the island of Crete. And the Romanians steal a little chunk of Bulgaria, just kind of because they can. Oh, and the Montenegrins get some territory. Little war, little countries, makes these little countries think they are powerful and strong and do whatever they want. And the Austrians disagree, being that they're right in this territory over here. The Austrian Kaiser and the King of Austria-Hungary believes that they need to crush Serbia to prevent them from looking towards their territories for expansion. His heir, Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, disagrees and advocates for a federalized Austria where each ethnic group, each nation would have their own political rights. This is an ethnographic map of the Balkans, just as in a way of showing you how difficult it would be to try to draw nation-state borderlines. Look at Bulgaria. Look, there's all these different ethnicities. It kind of just mixed together in a checkerboard pattern in these areas. So, you know this story already. Archduke Franz Ferdinand von Habsburg is murdered in the city of Sarajevo, Bosnia, by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist who wanted Bosnia to become part of a greater Serbia. He's part of this organization called Young Bosnia, which is supported indirectly by the group called the Black Hand, which is a Serbian secret society funded by people like the Crown Prince of Serbia. Austria, correctly, believes that Serbia is behind the assassination, and even if they wasn't, they didn't care. They were looking for an excuse to crush Serbia. Austro-Hungarians tried to convince Germany that Serbia had effectively declared war on Austria, but that was no guarantee until they heard back from Germany. So the German Kaiser sends a letter on July 6th. This is a famous historical sort of like, oh, it's Germany's fault the war happened, saying they could rely on Germany to support whatever action was necessary to deal with Serbia. The Germans left it vague enough in their minds to allow for de-escalation and avoidance of war, and the Austrians read this as a blank check to do whatever they wanted to the Serbians. This is how the assassination happened. Very accurate cartoon. Supposedly Gavrilo Princip was getting a sandwich. He was in front of a deli. I want to believe it was a sandwich. Serbia's given 5 days to respond to an ultimatum that's just ridiculous. It's, amongst other things, the ultimatum from Austria to Serbia is, you will turn in anybody who's responsible for the assassination of the Archduke, which the Serbians are not going to do. So Austria declares war on July 28th. This is the first war declaration, but right now it's only a war between Serbia and Austria. Russia, allied with Serbia, partially mobilizes their army, and that's what you're looking at here. They put them on train cars, they get them to meet up, bring them in from the countryside. Again, the military planning in the time said if you mobilize, you can't back down, or else other countries will see you as weak and they'll destroy you. So it's still possible, once Russia partially mobilizes, to theoretically avoid war. They haven't fully mobilized. Maybe they could back down. Russian military officials disagree, and they basically convince the Tsar to fully mobilize and prepare to fight Germany as well, even though right now, on July 28th, I'm sorry, this is on July 28th, it's only Austria versus Serbia. We're not at World War yet. So Russia fully mobilizes on the 29th. Germany responds, says, we see this as a threat. You have 12 hours to demobilize, which is impossible. You can't just turn the trains around and send everybody back home, even if you decided to make the decision in 12 hours. And then Germany declares war on Russia. And so Russia, at that point, declares war on Austria and Germany and Serbia. And you have now a war between Austria and Germany on one side, Serbia and Russia on the other side. Then, because Germany on August 1st declares war against Russia, you have the entry of France on the 1st of August onto the Russo-Serbian side. So right now you've got Germany and Austria in between Russia and France. So the Germans, again, kind of make this harder on themselves, and they need to. And the general Alfred von Schlieffen, whose plan is basically drawn up in 1894 in the event that there was a war between France and Russia and Germany, because those two countries allied specifically to fight Germany, and basically assumed that Germany was going to be in a war that was outnumbered. Incorrectly, it turns out, Schlieffen believed that the Russians did not have the railroad infrastructure to move troops quickly to go fight the Germans. The idea was a knockout punch through, this is a euphemism, an invasion through neutral Belgium. The flatlands there could occur quickly. The city of Paris could be captured, and the war would be over in France, and Germany could turn its forces over to the Russians. It was not a new thing to violate countries' neutrality. This has happened in the Napoleonic Wars. This has happened in European history constantly. So, in any case, once German troops start to move through Belgium, the British declare war on August 4th. So this is 3 days after the French declaration of war, supposedly because of the German troops invading Belgium. But really, they didn't want to be left out of potential future peace in which the victors of Europe, France and Russia, they thought, dictated how Europe was going to be set up. Last player in the war, the Ottoman Empire, joins in October 1914 in this really, really weird incident where the Germans are delivering them battleships, the Ottomans, and German sailors are piloting these battleships. They sail past Constantinople, Istanbul, go attack a couple Russian cities on the Black Sea, and the Ottomans declare war because the Germans borrowed their ships and effectively made them do so. It's very, very strange. It's one of those incidences I like to do more research on. And that is that.